I'm sorry, it was an accident.
Sage Williams had 3 problems that Thursday night. First, her obsessive ex-boyfriend was following her through the most expensive restaurant in the city where she shouldn't even be. Second, she was wearing high heels that looked more like medieval torture instruments. Third, at the exact moment she tried to escape him, her heel betrayed her spectacularly. She fell. Not on the floor. That would be too simple. Not into an empty chair. That would be lucky. She fell directly into the lap of a man dining alone at the most private table in the restaurant. And from the deadly silence, and the fact that everyone stopped eating simultaneously to stare, she realized she'd just sat in the lap of the wrong person. Very wrong.
Welcome to my library. I'm Lena, and our story is just beginning.
Chapter 1. The Disastrous Fall.
Are you running from him?
Ren, this place is way too expensive. We shouldn't be here, I murmured as we walked through the door of Eclipse, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, decorated entirely in black and gold tones that screamed money and power in every elaborate detail. Ren rolled her eyes, pulling my arm with the determination of someone who doesn't take no for an answer. Relax. It's my boss's company anniversary, and he paid for everything. Enjoy the free food at least once in your life. I feel like an intruder, I confessed, looking around and seeing people who look like they'd stepped directly out of fashion magazines, all wearing clothes that probably cost more than my car. Everyone here seems to belong to a completely different world from mine, and you look gorgeous. So stop complaining and enjoy the expensive wine while you can. Ren gently pushed me toward a side table, where the corporate event occupied half of the restaurant's main dining room. We sat down, and a waiter immediately appeared with glasses of red wine that gleamed under the soft light of crystal chandeliers. I picked up the glass with nervous fingers, trying to relax and enjoy the evening, when my eyes caught a familiar movement from across the room. Tyler. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I was going to throw up right there on the expensive table. He was crossing the restaurant with that confident walk I used to find charming and now only made me nauseous, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made every hair on my body stand on end. Shit, Ren. Tyler's here, I whispered urgently, shrinking in my chair as if that could somehow magically make me invisible. Ren turned her head so fast, she almost knocked over her own glass, her eyes widening in shock and anger. What? How did he know you were here? He probably followed me again, I answered, feeling that familiar mix of fear and irritation rising in my throat. I knew there was a car behind me on the way here. I knew it and ignored it because I wanted to believe I was being paranoid. Before Ren could respond, Tyler was already beside our table, that gentle and completely fake smile plastered on his face like a well-rehearsed mask. Sage, what an incredible coincidence running into you here. I took a deep breath, mentally counting to 3 before speaking. Tyler, you followed me. This isn't a coincidence. This is stalking, and you know it. He had the absolute audacity to fake offense, putting his hand on his chest as if I'd just accused him of murder. Follow? I was having dinner with clients and saw you by chance. Just came over to say hi to my ex-girlfriend. Ex being the absolutely important word in that sentence, I cut in, feeling my patience already hanging by an extremely thin thread. We broke up 3 months ago, Tyler. 3 full months. Broke up because you were confused about your own feelings, he insisted in that condescending tone that always made me want to scream. But I know you still love me deep down, and just need a little more time to realize we're perfect together, that we were made for each other. Ren leaned forward, her voice loaded with sharp sarcasm that I loved about her. Dude, she said no about 47 times in different languages. Do you need a diagram drawn out? I can make one if it'll help you understand. Tyler ignored her completely, as he always did, his eyes still fixed on me in a way that made my skin crawl uncomfortably. Can we talk in private? Just 5 minutes of your time? No, Tyler, we can't talk. I stood up from the chair in an abrupt movement, grabbing my purse with hands that trembled slightly from contained anger. I've made it more than clear that it's over between us, that there's no future, that I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Something darkened in his eyes in a way that made me feel a real chill run down my spine, and his voice changed completely, becoming lower and dangerous. Sage, you're being dramatic like always. We have a future together, and you know it deep in your heart. I didn't respond, just turned and started walking quickly toward the bathrooms, my heart beating way too fast in my chest. I heard Ren trying to block him behind me, her voice rising in volume as she said something about calling security, but Tyler's determined footsteps kept following me through the dining room. The corridor between the tables was narrow and full of waiters carrying plates that probably cost a fortune, and my high heels made every hurried step a small torture. I looked back once and saw Tyler still coming in my direction, with that scary determination he always had. So I picked up my pace and turned a corner between the tables way too sharply. That's when my right heel gave out with a loud snap, that seemed to echo through the entire restaurant, my balance disappearing in a second as my body started toppling sideways without control. I tried to grab onto anything nearby, my arms flailing in the air in a completely ridiculous way, but physics is a cruel bitch, and gravity never forgives anyone. I fell hard, directly into the lap of a man sitting alone at the most isolated and private table in all of Eclipse, and the impact knocked the air out of my lungs all at once. The first coherent thought my panicked brain managed to form was that he smelled incredibly good, like something expensive and woody that made my senses scramble completely. The second thought was much more alarming. I was sitting in the lap of a complete stranger in a restaurant full of important people, and from the absolute silence that settled around us, everyone was staring directly at us. I lifted my face slowly, kind of scared of what I'd find, and came face to face with the most absurdly handsome man I'd ever seen in my entire life. It wasn't that common magazine or movie star beauty. It was the kind of beauty that seemed to have been sculpted by an obsessive artist who spent years perfecting every minute detail, the kind of face that made you literally forget how to breathe properly. Icy gray eyes studied me with a mixture of genuine surprise and something that seemed dangerously close to contained amusement, and that's when I realized my hands were gripping his broad shoulders to keep from falling further. My entire body pressed against his solid chest in a way that made my face heat up instantly. Sorry, I slipped. I managed to stammer, my voice coming out strange and much higher than normal. I can see that clearly, he responded, and his voice was deep and dangerous, but somehow not threatening yet, carrying a refined accent I couldn't completely identify. I tried to stand up with whatever dignity I had left, but the broken heel betrayed me again, and I kind of stumbled once more, falling harder against his chest. His large hands automatically went to my waist, holding firmly but not hurting, and the touch sent a wave of heat through my entire body. "Easy," he murmured quietly, and for the first time, I noticed there was an almost smile playing dangerously at the corners of his sculpted mouth. My heel broke completely, I explained completely unnecessarily, my face probably red as a tomato at that point. I don't usually sit in strangers' laps normally. I swear it's not a habit of mine. Good to know, he replied, and this time the smile appeared for real, small, but absolutely devastating. It would be quite a concerning habit if it were. "Sage!" Tyler's loud voice cut through the strange moment like a sharp knife, and I turned my head to see him standing a few yards away, his face a confused mixture of shock and fury that would have been comical if it weren't so scary. "What are you doing?" he practically shouted, and several people at nearby tables turned to watch the whole scene. "I fell, Tyler," I responded, my voice coming out higher than intended from the absolute mortification of the situation. "It's obvious I fell. My heel broke and I completely lost my balance." The man on whose lap I was still embarrassingly sitting looked from Tyler to me, his gray eyes narrowing slightly as if processing all the information at high speed. "Are you running from him?" The question was so direct and casual that I blinked in surprise for a second before answering with brutal honesty. "He's my obsessive ex-boyfriend who absolutely won't accept that we broke up 3 months ago." Something darkened in his eyes immediately, a dangerous shadow passing over his handsome face that made my stomach turn, but strangely not from fear. "I see perfectly." Tyler took a bold step forward, his voice getting even louder and more hysterical. "Sage, get up from there right now. You're making a completely ridiculous scene in front of everyone." The man's voice changed completely in tone, becoming so icy and dangerous that even I felt a shiver run down my spine. And I was technically on the good side of this veiled threat. "She'll get up when I decide she can get up, not when you tell her to." The tense silence that followed was so thick, I could swear I could hear my own heart beating frantically in my chest. Tyler instinctively backed up 2 steps, his entire body reacting to something primitive and threatening in the controlled posture of the man still holding me by the waist. "Who are you?" Tyler asked, and for the first time since I'd known him for years, he seemed genuinely scared of someone. Someone you definitely don't want as an enemy. A large, intimidating man appeared out of nowhere beside the table, making Tyler automatically take more steps back. "Boss, any problems happening here?" "Boss." So the man I was sitting on was important enough to have personal security calling him boss. Great. Just perfect. My life was going incredibly well at that moment. "This man is bothering the lady in an unpleasant way," the man beneath me said, in that still, icy, and controlled voice. "Remove him from the establishment immediately, Kane." "I'm her boyfriend," Tyler protested desperately and pathetically. "Ex-boyfriend," I corrected too loudly, my voice echoing through the silent restaurant. "Ex-boyfriend I broke up with 3 months ago who won't accept the answer at all." The man looked directly at me, and from the absurd proximity I could see fascinating little details in his eyes, small darker spots in the light gray that were hypnotizing. "He doesn't understand the word no," I sighed tiredly. part of me wanting to laugh at the complete absurdity of this whole situation. Apparently it needs to be translated into some language he'll finally understand. He looked back at Tyler with that dangerous intensity, and the smile that appeared on his face was absolutely predatory in a way that made my stomach tighten. So, let me translate very clearly for you. The lady doesn't want you near her at all. If I see you stalking her again, you'll quickly discover that a broken heel is the least of your problems in life. Tyler went visibly pale, but still tried to maintain some posture in the face of public humiliation. You can't threaten me like that. That wasn't a threat at all. It was a very clear warning. The man made a casual gesture with his head to the security guard. Kane, escort him out of my restaurant now. The security guard called Kane grabbed Tyler's arm, with a firmness that clearly left no room for discussion or resistance, beginning to literally drag him toward the main exit. Tyler tried to protest and struggle uselessly, but it was completely futile against the man's strength. "Sage, this isn't over at all," he shouted, as he was removed from Eclipse in a humiliating way. "It's been over for 3 months," I shouted back, completely exhausted from this whole situation. When Tyler finally disappeared completely from view being thrown outside, the restaurant still remained in deadly and awkward silence, all the curious eyes still fixed on me and the mysterious man who continued holding me by the waist, as if it were the most natural and normal thing in the entire world. It was only then that it really hit me that I was still sitting on his lap. "I should get off your lap now," I murmured, trying to stand up again much more carefully this time. "You probably should," he agreed calmly, but the firm hands on my waist didn't move an inch. I looked directly at him, genuinely confused. "Are you going to let me go then? In just a minute? Why wait?" His eyes met mine with an intensity that made my heart race dangerously. "Because I'm deciding something important. Deciding exactly what. Whether I'm going to let you leave normally, or if I'm going to keep you sitting here until I figure out why a woman desperately running from an obsessive ex ended up being the most interesting thing that's happened to me in years." I was literally breathless for a long second, my brain trying to process if this was real, or if I'd hit my head too hard in the fall. "That's a pretty weird pickup line." He finally smiled for real completely, and the smile was so devastating and beautiful that I finally understood why the entire restaurant treated him with so much respect mixed with fear. But did it work at least a little? I bit my lower lip, fighting against my own involuntary smile that wanted to appear. Maybe it worked a little. He finally released my waist, but with extreme care, his warm hands sliding across my skin as he helped me stand, and held my elbow firmly to make sure I wouldn't fall again pathetically. "Your heel is completely destroyed. You can't walk properly like that." I looked down and saw the heel hanging pathetically from my foot, the shame returning with full renewed force. Great. Just perfect. More humiliation to add to my special collection from today. He pulled an expensive phone from the inner pocket of his impeccable suit, quickly dialing a number without taking those penetrating gray eyes off me. "Kane, bring women's shoes immediately, size." He paused purposefully, looking at me in clear question. 37, I answered automatically, still processing everything. "But you really don't need to do this. I can. 37, anything comfortable she can walk in without risk of falling again. And fast." He hung up without even waiting for any response from the other side. I blinked several times, completely surprised. "You have women's shoes available just like that out of nowhere?" "I have various resources available for multiple situations." That's an extremely evasive answer, but I'll gladly accept it because I really need a functional shoe. I sat in the comfortable chair he gently offered, my entire body still trembling slightly from all the adrenaline. "You clearly run things here, don't you? Everyone obeys you instantly like that?" "Usually, yes. In most situations. You're the owner of this whole place?" Among various other things. I rolled my eyes, feeling something strange between irritation and genuine amusement. "Among other things" is also a pretty evasive answer. He sat elegantly in the chair across from mine, his posture relaxed but still somehow completely controlled. "I'm a man who values his own privacy quite a bit. I just literally sat in your lap in front of at least 50 people. I couldn't hold back a laugh. Privacy kind of went straight into outer space. His eyes sparkled with genuine humor for the first time. "Absolute truth. So since privacy ended anyway, tell me your full name." "Sage Williams." "Reese Harlow," he replied, extending his hand politely. I shook his hand, feeling the firm, warm grip. I repeated the name mentally, feeling like I should definitely recognize it from somewhere, but not being able to identify exactly where the hell from. "Nice to meet you, Reese, even in the strangest circumstances possible. Sorry again for the whole dramatic lap incident." "Don't apologize at all. It was genuinely the absolute highlight of my entire month." I laughed nervously, accepting the glass of red wine that a waiter silently brought to the table. "Your month must be incredibly boring, then." He leaned slightly forward, his eyes still fixed on mine in a way that made my breathing fail completely. "You have no idea how much." much. Kane quickly returned carrying an elegant box of shoes, placing it on the table with reverent care. Reese took the box, opened it with precise movements, and showed me 3 different pairs of expensive shoes. Choose whichever you prefer. I looked at the absurdly expensive shoes and swallowed hard. These shoes cost more than my entire monthly rent. Choose, Sage, he repeated calmly, but it was clearly an order disguised as a gentle request. I picked the simplest nude pump of the 3, trying not to think about the absurd price. This one works perfectly. Reese stood up from the chair and, without any prior warning to prepare me, knelt directly in front of me. My heart literally stopped. "What are you doing exactly?" He took my foot with extreme care, removing the broken and pathetic heel with gentle movements. "Helping you, obviously." I tried to pull my foot back instinctively. "I can do this perfectly by myself." He held my ankle firmly, but incredibly gently, his eyes meeting mine. "I know perfectly well that you can, but I'm going to do it anyway." I was speechless as he placed the new shoe on my foot with absurd care, his long fingers touching my skin casually and sending immediate shivers all through my leg. The strange intimacy of the whole action made my heart race dangerously. "Does it fit well?" he asked, looking up and trapping me with that intense gaze. "Fits perfectly," I managed to murmur, completely voiceless for several seconds. He did exactly the same careful process with the other foot, creating a completely absurd and unexpected intimacy in the whole action. When he finished, he stood up and offered his strong hand to help me stand as well. "Test it to be sure," he instructed calmly. I stood up and walked a few experimental steps, the shoe fitting absolutely perfectly. "How did you get the size and style I'd like exactly right?" "I always pay very close attention to important details." "Sage!" Ren finally appeared, running desperately between the tables, almost knocking over a waiter in the process. "Are you okay?" I saw Tyler literally being thrown out and I was terrified. She stopped completely dead, seeing Reese standing beside me, her eyes widening in an almost comical way. "Who's that?" she whispered to me in a not at all discreet way. "Reese Harlow. The man I literally fell on," I answered, still kind of dizzy from everything. Ren's eyes widened even more impossibly, and she went visibly pale. "Reese Harlow, like that specific Reese Harlow?" I looked from Ren to Reese, confused. "Context would be useful right now. Later. I'll tell you absolutely everything later," Ren said quickly, still visibly shocked. Reese addressed Ren politely, but maintaining a certain distance. "Your friend will be perfectly fine. Tyler won't bother her again at all." "How can you guarantee that with such certainty?" Ren asked, still processing everything. "I have my specific ways of guaranteeing certain things." I looked directly at Reese, finally letting the question out. "What exactly do you do, Reese?" "I manage quite diverse businesses." That definitely wasn't a real answer. It was an intentionally vague answer. "There's a difference," he replied, with an almost smile. "And why be so vague with me?" He moved closer to me, his voice lowering so only I could hear clearly. "Because if I tell you the complete truth right now, you'll probably run away, and I definitely don't want you to run yet." My heart raced completely out of control. "Yet implies you want to see me again." "Obviously I do." He grabbed my phone from the table with impressive boldness, quickly typed his number and called his own cell phone. "Now I have your number, and you have mine. You're pretty direct and bold. I'm going to call you tomorrow without fail," he declared with absolute confidence. "We're going to have dinner together, for real this time. Without stalker ex-boyfriends or heels that break dramatically. What if I say no to the invitation?" The smile he gave me was absolutely dangerous and sexy. "You won't say no at all. You're incredibly arrogant." "I'm confident." "There's an important difference between the two." "What would be the exact difference?" He moved dangerously close, his voice low and intense. "Arrogance would be just thinking you'll say yes. Confidence is knowing with absolute certainty that you want to say yes, even if you fight internally with yourself about it." I was literally breathless. "That was a very well-crafted answer. I have several diverse skills." Ren pulled my arm insistently. "We really should leave now." I agreed, but my eyes remained completely fixed on Reese. "Yeah, we probably should. Tomorrow, Sage," Reese said in that deep voice. "Wait for my call." "Okay," was all I could say, before Ren practically dragged me out of Eclipse. When we got to her car, parked a few blocks away, Ren turned to me with an absolutely serious expression. "Okay, now tell me who the hell Reese Harlow really is," I practically shouted, still processing everything. Ren took a deep breath, her hands gripping the steering wheel. "Sage, he's basically the mob boss who controls half of this entire city." My world stopped completely. "He's what?" "Legal businesses up front as a facade, but absolutely everyone knows he controls territory, nightclubs, and probably dozens of pretty illegal things." Ren looked at me with genuine concern. "You literally fell into the lap of the mob boss, Sage." I processed the information for several long seconds. "I'm a completely normal architect. I can't get involved with the mob at all." "But you're going to answer when he calls tomorrow?" Ren asked, knowing the answer. I paused for a long time, thinking about everything. Probably yes. Sage. I know. I ran my hands through my hair frustratedly. I know it's complete insanity. But he was irresistible. I sighed deeply. Very irresistible. Ren shook her head, but she was smiling slightly. You're crazy. Completely, I agreed, looking out the window as Eclipse disappeared in the distance. But maybe it's the best kind of crazy I've ever done. Chapter 2. The Call and the Date.
I always keep promises.
I was in the middle of a particularly boring meeting about building codes when my phone buzzed in my pocket for the third time in 5 minutes. And for the first time in my professional career, I seriously considered faking a medical emergency just so I could answer. The client kept talking about ventilation requirements while I fought against the absurd urge to check who was calling, because an irrational and completely inconvenient part of me was hoping it was him. Reese Harlow, the man I'd literally fallen on the night before. The man Ren had spent 2 hours telling me frightening details about his empire. The man I definitely shouldn't want to see again, but who had occupied every thought of mine since I woke up. When the meeting finally ended 40 minutes later, I practically ran back to my desk and grabbed my phone with hands that trembled slightly from anticipation, mixed with nervousness. 3 missed calls, all from the same unknown number, and while I was still looking at the screen trying to decide if I should call back, the phone buzzed again in my hand. I answered before I could convince myself otherwise, my voice coming out more nervous than I intended. Hello? Good afternoon, Sage. And that deep, controlled voice traveled through the line directly to somewhere deep in my stomach, making completely inappropriate butterflies explode there. My heart raced instantly. Reese, hi. Were you expecting my call? There was a trace of amusement in his voice that I could practically visualize on his handsome face. Maybe I was waiting a little, I admitted, leaning my elbows on the desk and trying to sound more casual than I felt. You said you'd call, and from the little I learned about you yesterday, I imagine you're a man of your word. I always keep what I promise without exception, he replied, and there was something in the way he said it that made my breathing fail momentarily. Are you free tonight? Depends completely, I answered, biting my lip and trying not to sound too eager. Are you finally going to tell me what you really do, or are you going to continue with those extremely vague and evasive answers? I heard what sounded like a low laugh from the other end of the line, a rich and warm sound that made my skin tingle pleasantly. If I promise absolute honesty, will you have dinner with me? I paused purposefully, making him wait a few seconds before answering. Yes, I accept the invitation. I'll pick you up at 7 sharp. He said with that irritating and attractive confidence at the same time. Wear something comfortable and casual, and no heels that break dramatically. I couldn't hold back the laugh that escaped. You're never going to forget that, are you? It was an absolutely memorable and unforgettable moment, he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. See you later, Sage. I hung up the phone and stared at it for several seconds, processing the fact that I'd just accepted a date with someone Ren had described as dangerous, powerful, and definitely involved in illegal things. My life had officially become more interesting, and possibly more complicated than I ever imagined it would be. At 7 o'clock exactly, as promised, a firm and confident knock sounded on my apartment door. I checked my appearance one last time in the mirror, the dress simple and casual but elegant, low and comfortable shoes as he'd instructed, and took a deep breath before opening the door. Reese was leaning against the doorframe with that relaxed but controlled posture that seemed natural to him, wearing dark pants and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up on his strong forearms in a way that should be illegal. His gray eyes traveled over me from top to bottom slowly and appreciatively, and the heat of that gaze made my skin warm instantly. You look beautiful, he said simply, and the obvious sincerity in his voice made my heart squeeze in a strange way. You don't look bad either, I replied, trying to sound casual as I grabbed my purse and locked the door behind me. His car was parked in front of the building, an expensive and elegant model that probably cost more than my entire apartment. And he opened the passenger door for me before walking around and getting in on the driver's side. The interior smelled of expensive leather and that masculine scent of his that had stuck in my memory since yesterday. So, I began, as he drove through the city streets with precise and confident movements, are you finally going to tell me what you really do, or are we still going to play 20 evasive questions? He glanced briefly at me before returning his eyes to the road, a small smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. Straight to the point. I like that about you. I don't usually waste time with unnecessary beating around the bush. I manage territory throughout the city, control several legal businesses and some less legal ones, he said surprisingly directly, his voice casual as if he were commenting on the weather. Less legal, like exactly? I pressed, wanting to hear him say the words clearly. Like things you don't need to know all the details about yet. At least not today, he replied, and there was a tone of protection in his voice that was strangely comforting and frustrating at the same time. I took a deep breath, deciding to be equally direct. Ren told me you're like the mob boss who controls half the city. He didn't seem surprised or deny the statement, just nodded slightly. Ren isn't wrong in her assessment. I processed that for a few seconds, looking out the window as the city lights passed by. I should be getting out of this car right now and running in the opposite direction. You probably should, he agreed calmly, but there was something in his voice. But you're not going to do that. I turned to look at him directly. Why are you so absolutely certain of that? He finally really looked at me, his eyes meeting mine for a long second, before returning to the road. Because you're too brave to run without knowing the full story first, without giving a real chance to understand. Or maybe I'm just too stupid to have the good sense to walk away from obvious danger. The smile he gave me was genuine and beautiful. You're not stupid at all, Sage. Many things you may be, but stupid is definitely not one of them. The restaurant he took me to was completely different from Eclipse, a smaller and more intimate place in a private rooftop, with a view of the illuminated city, without all that heavy atmosphere of money and power that had dominated the previous night. There were only a few tables scattered around, all with guaranteed privacy, and Reese guided us to one in the corner that offered the best view. Is this place yours too? I asked as we sat down, accepting the menu that a discreet waiter brought. It's also among my properties, he confirmed, his eyes never leaving my face. But here is more private, more peaceful. I thought you'd prefer something less formal after yesterday's experience. Considering yesterday ended with me sitting in your lap in front of 50 shocked people, I definitely appreciate the increased privacy, I replied, unable to hold back the smile as I remembered. We ordered food, and when we were alone again, Reese leaned forward in his chair, his eyes studying me with that intensity that made my heart race. Tell me about Tyler. How did you two break up exactly? The question caught me by surprise, but the genuine curiosity on his face made me answer honestly. I finally realized he was controlling disguised as caring, jealous disguised as protective, and an emotional manipulator disguised as a nice and understanding guy. When I broke up with him, he didn't accept it at all, and has been stalking me since then. Something darkened dangerously in his eyes. Are you afraid of him sometimes? Sometimes yes, I admitted, nervously fidgeting with the napkin. He gets really intense, shows up in places he shouldn't be, sends dozens of messages, stands outside my building. He's never crossed the line of what would be clearly illegal, but it's scary anyway. He won't bother you anymore at all, Reese said, and there was a dangerous promise in his voice that should scare me, but strangely didn't. How can you guarantee that with such certainty? Because I've already made it extremely clear to him that if he comes near you again, he'll have very serious problems. His eyes met mine, intense and sincere, and I always keep my promises. That should probably scare me, I murmured, more to myself than to him. But does it really scare you? He asked, leaning even further forward. I paused for a long time, thinking honestly about the answer. Not as much as it definitely should scare me. The food arrived, and we talked about lighter things while we ate, and I discovered layers of him I didn't expect to find. He had a dry and sharp sense of humor that matched perfectly with my natural sarcasm, was surprisingly well-read and cultured, and asked genuine questions about my work as an architect that showed real interest. Do you always do this? I asked at some point between the main course and dessert, the chemistry between us growing with each passing minute. Do what specifically? Make women feel like they're the only person in the world when you focus your attention on them, I replied, trying to sound more casual than I felt. He put his fork aside, his eyes meeting mine with a seriousness that made my stomach tighten. No, I don't do that always at all. In fact, you're the first person in a long time who can hold my attention completely like this. Why? The question came out in a whisper. Why me specifically? Because you literally fell into my lap but didn't run away when you found out who I really am, he replied, his voice low and intense. Because you look at me and see a man, not a monster or an opportunity. Because you're brave and sarcastic and beautiful and completely different from anyone I've ever met. I was speechless for several seconds, my heart beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. I don't know what to say to that. You don't need to say anything yet, he murmured, his hand crossing the table to take mine, our fingers intertwining naturally. Just keep giving me a chance to get to know you better. When we left the restaurant hours later, Reese insisted on taking me home even though I said I could call a car. The ride back was filled with easy and comfortable conversation, and when he stopped in front of my building, neither of us made a move to get out of the car immediately. Thanks for the whole evening, I finally said, turning to look at him in the dimness of the car. It was unexpectedly wonderful considering everything. Can I see you again soon? He asked, and for the first time I heard a note of genuine uncertainty in his voice. Yes, I'd definitely like that, I replied honestly. He got out of the car and walked around to open my door, helping me out with a gentleness that contrasted completely with the dangerous image everyone painted of him. We walked to the building entrance, and when we stopped there under the dim light of the entrance, he turned to face me completely. "Can I kiss you, Sage?" The question came out low but clear, his eyes on mine. My heart literally stopped for a second. "You ask permission?" "Always without exception," he replied with absolute seriousness. "Consent is non-negotiable under any circumstances," and it was that simple answer that made me melt completely inside, that transformed physical attraction into something potentially much more dangerous. "You can," I whispered, already breathless before the kiss even happened. He moved closer slowly, giving me time to change my mind if I wanted to, but I didn't want to at all. When his lips finally touched mine, it was as if the entire world stopped spinning for a moment, suspended in time. The kiss started gentle and exploratory, but quickly deepened into something more intense and loaded with promise, his hands going to my waist and pulling me closer while my hands rose to his broad shoulders. When we finally separated, both breathless, I was trembling slightly and completely dizzy. "Wow," was all I could murmur intelligently. His lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "I completely agree. Good night, Sage." "Good night, Reese," I replied, still kind of dazed as I entered the building and watched him return to the car. I climbed the stairs to my apartment floating, the taste of him still on my lips, and the growing certainty that I'd just gotten involved in something much bigger and more complicated than I ever imagined. But that strangely felt absolutely right in every possible way. Chapter 3. Tyler returns.
He crossed a line.
And Reese takes action. 3 days had passed since that first dinner with Reese, and my life had transformed into something completely different from what it was before that fateful night at Eclipse. We'd seen each other every day since then, quiet dinners at discreet places, conversations that stretched for hours about everything and nothing at the same time, and kisses that were getting increasingly intense, but always stopped before crossing that definitive line we both knew was approaching rapidly. I was starting to get used to his constant presence in my life, to the good morning messages that arrived on my phone before my alarm even went off, to the way he always asked about my day with genuine interest, and especially to the strange sense of security I felt when I was near him, even knowing exactly who and what he really was. Tyler had been strangely silent since that night at Eclipse, and I'd started to naively believe that maybe he'd finally gotten the message and given up for good. I should have known life was never that simple, especially not my life apparently. I was in my office on a Thursday afternoon, reviewing architectural plans for a new commercial renovation project, when the door opened without any prior knock of warning. I looked up annoyed, ready to reprimand whoever had entered without permission, and my stomach sank completely seeing Tyler standing there in the doorway with that determined expression I knew all too well. "Sage, we need to talk urgently," he said, closing the door behind him in a way that made me instinctively stand up from my chair. "No, Tyler, we don't need to talk about absolutely anything," I replied, keeping the desk between us as a physical barrier. "I've already made it clear I don't want to talk to you at all." He took a step forward, completely ignoring my words as he always did. "It's about the guy you're seeing. That one from the restaurant. Do you know who he really is?" My heart raced, but I kept my voice firm and controlled. "I know exactly who he is, and it's none of your business at all who I choose to go out with, Tyler. He's a criminal, Sage," Tyler practically shouted, his voice rising several tones. "A dangerous mob boss who controls half the city through violence and intimidation. Do you really think it's safe to get involved with someone like that?" I took a deep breath, feeling anger rising in my throat like hot lava. "He's never made me feel afraid for even a second, which is completely different from you, Tyler. You stalk me, follow me, show up in places where you weren't invited and make me feel constantly threatened." Something darkened in his face, in a way that made my blood freeze in my veins, the nice guy mask finally falling completely to reveal what had always been hidden underneath. "You're going to deeply regret trading me for him, Sage. That I can guarantee." My heart raced, but I kept my chin raised in defiance. "Was that a direct threat, Tyler?" "It was a very clear warning," he replied, his voice low and dangerous in a way I'd never heard before. "You think he's going to protect you? That he really cares about you? Men like him use women like you and then discard them when they get bored. Get out of my office right now," I ordered, my voice trembling slightly but firm. "And don't ever come back, or I'll call the police for real this time." He looked at me for a few more long and tense seconds, something calculating and cold passing through his eyes, before finally turning and leaving, slamming the door hard enough to make the pictures on the wall shake. As soon as he disappeared, my legs gave out, and I had to lean on the desk, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my own ears. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and called the number that had been etched in my memory for the last 3 days, desperately needing to hear that deep and controlled voice that had become my anchor. He answered on the second ring, his voice immediately concerned, as if he could sense my state through the line. "Sage? What happened?" "Tyler showed up at my office just now," I managed to say, my voice coming out more shaken than I wanted. He confronted me about you, about us going out together. Reese's voice changed completely, becoming so icy and dangerous that even I felt a shiver run down my spine. Did he threaten you directly? Kind of, I admitted, running my free hand through my hair nervously. He said I was going to regret trading him for you, that it was a warning and not a threat, but the way he said it was scary, Reese. Where are you? The question came quick and direct. Still at the office. Everyone's already left. I'm alone here. Stay where you are and lock the office door, he ordered, and I could hear sounds of movement on the other end of the line, as if he was already getting ready to leave. I'll pick you up in 15 minutes maximum in Sage. Yes, I replied, locking the door as he instructed. He won't threaten you again. That I can guarantee. 15 minutes later, exactly as promised, Reese appeared at my office door with an expression on his face I'd never seen before. Something dark and dangerous that confirmed everything people said about him being someone you definitely didn't want as an enemy. But when his eyes met mine, the expression softened, and he crossed the room in long, determined strides. Are you okay? He asked, his hands immediately going to my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks gently while examining me as if looking for visible injuries. I'm fine physically, just emotionally shaken, I replied honestly, allowing myself to relax into his touch. He didn't touch me, just said threatening things and then left. Get your things. You're staying at my apartment tonight, he declared, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. There you'll be safe and protected. Reese, you don't need to do this. I started to protest, but he cut me off with an intense look. I do need to do this, Sage. He threatened you because of your association with me, which makes this unacceptable. His eyes held mine with an intensity that made my heart skip. I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you. That's a promise. What are you going to do to him? I asked, part of me afraid of the answer but needing to know anyway. He hesitated for just a second before responding. I'm going to have another conversation with him, much more definitive and clear this time, to make sure he understands perfectly that you're completely off limits to him. I took his face between my hands, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. Reese, don't do anything you'll regret later, please. He's not worth risking anything important. His expression softened completely, and he turned his face to kiss my palm gently. I only regret not meeting you much sooner, Sage. All the years I lost without knowing you existed in the world. Those simple words made something tighten painfully in my chest, and before I could think better of it, I leaned forward and kissed him with all the emotion I was feeling. He responded immediately, pulling me closer, as the kiss deepened into something intense and full of unspoken promises. When we finally separated, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine and took a deep breath. Come on, I'm taking you to a safe place, and then I'm going to resolve this once and for all. Reese's apartment was exactly what I expected from him, decorated entirely in dark and masculine tones with an absolutely stunning view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He settled me in the comfortable living room with instructions to stay there and relax, assuring me that the building's security was extremely tight and that no one could enter without prior authorization. How long will you be gone? I asked, as he prepared to leave again, trying not to sound as worried as I felt. A few hours at most, he replied, coming back to where I was sitting on the huge couch and kneeling in front of me to be at eye level. Kane will stay here with you, outside the door, so you won't be alone at all. If you need anything at all, just ask him. Be careful, please, I asked, touching his face again, memorizing every detail as if it were the last time. I'm always careful, sweetheart, he murmured, kissing my forehead in a prolonged way, before finally standing up and leaving the apartment. The following hours dragged painfully slowly as I tried to distract myself watching television or scrolling through my phone, but my mind kept going back to Reese and what exactly he was doing with Tyler at that exact moment. I knew I shouldn't care so much about what happened to my obsessive ex, but part of me still worried about the consequences this could all have. When the door finally opened again hours later, and Reese walked in, my eyes immediately scanned him looking for signs of violence or injuries. He looked completely intact, just a little more tired, and came directly to where I'd stood up from the couch when I heard him arrive. It's completely resolved, he said simply, pulling me into his arms firmly. Tyler understood very clearly this time that you're completely off limits to him, and he won't bother you anymore at all. What exactly did you do? I asked against his chest, not being sure if I really wanted to know all the details. Just made it very clear what the consequences would be if he came near you again, in any way, he replied vaguely, stroking my hair comfortingly. He'll disappear from your life forever this time, that I can promise. And strangely, I believed him wholeheartedly, relaxing for the first time since Tyler had appeared at my office. Reese held me in his arms for long minutes in comfortable silence, and I realized that in just a few days, this dangerous and powerful man had become something essential in my life, something I wasn't ready to question or analyze too deeply yet. All that mattered in that moment was that I felt completely safe in his arms, and Tyler had finally left my life, once and for all. Chapter 4. Entering his world.
This is who I am.
A week after Tyler's threat, Reese picked me up from work with a proposal that made my stomach churn with equal parts apprehension and curiosity. He wanted to take me to see one of the nightclubs he owned, not the kind of elegant and refined place like Eclipse, but rather the type of establishment where his business really happened, where the facade of respectability gave way to the raw reality of what he truly did. "Are you sure you want to show me this?" I asked as we drove to a part of the city I rarely visited, where the lights were dimmer and the streets emptier. "I thought you were trying to protect me from this whole side of your life." His fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, his jaw tensing in a way that showed he was thinking carefully before responding. "I want you to know exactly who I am, Sage. Not just the edited and softened version I show during our dinners, but the whole truth about what I do and how my world works." "Why now?" I insisted, studying his handsome profile in the dimness of the car. He glanced briefly at me before returning his eyes to the road. "Because this is getting serious between us. At least it's getting serious for me, and I need to know if you can accept everything that comes with me before we go any further." My heart raced at those words, but I didn't respond, just nodded and let the silence settle as we approached our destination. The club was discreet on the outside, just a black door without any sign or identification. But when Reese parked and we got out of the car, I noticed the presence of armed security strategically positioned in the shadows around the building. "Stay close to me the whole time," Reese instructed, his hand going to my back protectively as we approached the entrance. "And if anything makes you uncomfortable, just let me know, and we'll leave immediately." The door opened before we even knocked, a huge man with a scar running through his right eyebrow letting us pass with a respectful nod to Reese. The interior was dark and heavy with electronic music playing at a volume that made my chest vibrate, but Reese guided me through the main hall straight to a side staircase that led to a more private upper floor. It was up there that I truly saw what Ren had tried to explain to me that first night. Men dressed in expensive suits but with hard looks conversed in small groups, some clearly armed from the visible shapes under their jackets, and the air was loaded with a tension that made my skin crawl in a very uncomfortable way. Reese took me to a private office in the back, where a negotiation was clearly happening between Kane and two men I didn't know. The conversation stopped as soon as we entered, all eyes turning to us with expressions ranging from surprise to cautious curiosity. "Continue," Reese said casually, pulling me to sit beside him on a leather couch against the wall. "I just came to check on progress." The negotiation resumed, and during the following 20 minutes, I witnessed exchanges of money, discussions about territories and distribution routes that made it very clear the activities here were anything but legal. Reese participated a few times, his voice loaded with a cold authority that made everyone obey without question. And I saw for the first time the man everyone feared, not just the gentle man who took me to romantic dinners. When the meeting ended and we were alone in the office, Reese turned to me with an expression that mixed apprehension and determination. "So, what are you thinking now?" I took a few seconds to organize my thoughts, processing everything I'd just seen. "This is a lot, Reese. Much more real and scary than just hearing Ren talk about it." "Is it too much?" he asked, his voice getting lower, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something like real fear in his eyes. I stood up and went to where he was sitting, placing my hands on his tense shoulders. "It's scary seeing this side of you. I won't lie about that. But you're still you, still the man who asks permission before kissing me, who knelt down to put shoes on my feet, who protects me from Tyler without hesitation. And is that enough for you?" The question came out in a rough whisper, his hands going to my waist and pulling me closer. I looked straight into the gray eyes I'd learned to read so well in recent weeks. "It's enough so far, and I want to keep trying if you do too." The relief that passed over his face was so intense my heart squeezed, and he pulled me into a kiss that was different from all the others we'd shared before, loaded with gratitude and something deeper that neither of us was ready to name yet. 3 days later, I was at Reese's apartment on a rainy Saturday afternoon, the two of us lying on the huge couch watching a movie neither of us was really paying attention to. My head rested on his shoulder while his fingers played distractedly with my hair, and the atmosphere was calm and comfortable in a way that had become familiar between us. "Sage?" Reese's voice broke the silence suddenly, making me lift my head to look at him. "I want you." My heart skipped a beat, my stomach flipping at those 3 simple words. As in, he sat up straight, pulling me to sit as well, his hands holding mine with a firmness that showed the seriousness of the moment. "As in everything, I want all of you, not just our dates, not just the kisses we always stop before going too far. I want you in my life for real, in every possible way." The words hit me with a force that knocked the air from my lungs, and I stared at him, unable to form a coherent response for several seconds. "Reese, you don't need to answer now if you're not ready," he said quickly, his thumbs stroking my hands comfortingly. "Just think about it. No pressure at all." I took a deep breath, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. "What if I say I want you too? That I've wanted this for days but was afraid to take the first step?" His eyes darkened in a way that made heat spread across my skin, his voice coming out hoarse and low.
"Then I'll kiss you until you forget your own name and the rest of the world." "Then try," I challenged, my heart beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. He didn't need more encouragement. He pulled me into his lap in one fluid movement, his mouth meeting mine with an intensity that was different from all previous kisses, deeper and loaded with the promise of everything to come. My hands went to his hair while his slid down my back, pulling me so close there was no space between our bodies. The kiss deepened and extended, the tension that had built between us over recent weeks finally finding release. And when he stood up, carrying me in his arms, my legs automatically wrapped around his waist. He carried me down the hallway to the bedroom I'd never entered before, laying me on the huge bed with a gentleness that contrasted with the obvious urgency between us. What happened next was a mix of hands discovering new skin, low whispers loaded with desire and promises, clothes being removed slowly between kisses that stole the air from our lungs, and a connection that went far beyond the physical. He was careful and attentive in every way, always checking if I was okay, always ensuring my consent at every step, and when our bodies finally joined completely, it was perfect in a way that made tears appear in the corners of my eyes. Afterward, lying in each other's arms with hearts still racing and skin glistening with sweat, I felt the weight of what had just happened settling in my chest overwhelmingly. "This changes everything between us," I murmured against his chest, tracing lazy patterns on the warm skin. "For the better?" he asked, his fingers playing gently with my hair. I lifted myself a bit to look into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there that he rarely showed anyone. "Yes, definitely for the better." His lips curved into a small but genuine smile, pulling me back to his chest. "You're mine now, Sage. Truly mine." "Possessive?" I asked, unable to hold back the smile. "Very," he admitted without a trace of shame. "And I'm going to be more and more." I surprised myself with the answer that came out without hesitation. "I like that. I like being yours." He kissed me again, long and deep, and we stayed there intertwined while the rain continued falling outside, two completely different worlds meeting in a way that no one, including ourselves, would have predicted just a few weeks ago. Chapter 5. Celeste and Jealousy.
She's with me.
The charity event was happening at one of the most luxurious hotels in the city, and Reese had asked me to accompany him as his official partner, the first time I'd appear publicly beside him at something so formal and full of important people from his social circle. I was nervous in a way I couldn't hide, adjusting the elegant dress I'd bought especially for the occasion as we walked through the hall illuminated by crystal chandeliers. Reese's hand was firm and warm on my back, guiding me between groups of people who greeted him with respect, mixed with caution, and I could feel the curious looks that followed us wherever we went. I was starting to relax minimally when a tall and stunning woman approached us with determined steps, her dark eyes fixed on Reese with an intensity that made something uncomfortable stir in my stomach. "Reese, what a surprise seeing you here." Her voice was smooth but loaded with something sharp underneath, and when her eyes slid briefly to me before returning to him, I saw the clear flash of displeasure. "You normally avoid these tedious events." "Celeste?" Reese responded with a polite but distant nod, his hand on my back pulling me slightly closer to him in a gesture that seemed instinctive and possessive. "I came because I wanted to. And I brought company this time." Her eyes finally fixed on me for real, assessing me from head to toe in a way that made me feel like I was being catalogued and deemed insufficient at the same time. "I see that. Aren't you going to introduce me?" Before Reese could respond, I extended my hand politely, deciding to take control of the situation before it became stranger. "Sage Williams, pleasure to meet you." She shook my hand briefly and coldly, the smile on her face not even coming close to her eyes. "Celeste Dumont, an old friend of Reese's." The way she said old friend made it very clear it had been more than that, and I felt Reese tense beside me. He murmured a polite excuse and moved us away from her toward the bar, but I could feel Celeste's eyes burning into our backs as we walked away. "Old friend?" I asked when we were far enough not to be heard, accepting the champagne flute Reese got for me. He sighed, running his free hand through his hair frustratedly. "We had a casual arrangement some time ago, nothing serious or emotional, just something convenient for both when we needed it. I ended it weeks before I met you." I sipped the champagne, processing the information without the explosion of jealousy part of me expected to feel. "She doesn't seem very happy to see me here with you." "She'll have to accept reality," Reese replied, his voice firm as he held my waist protectively. "You're with me now, and that's not going to change." We spent the next hour circulating through the event, talking with various people Reese knew from the business world, and I was starting to feel more comfortable in that environment when Celeste appeared again, this time intercepting my path when Reese had stepped away for a few minutes to talk with an important associate. "So you're Reese's new flavor of the moment," she said without preamble, her voice low but clear enough for me to hear perfectly. Interesting choice on his part. I straightened my shoulders, refusing to let myself be intimidated by this beautiful woman clearly used to getting what she she wanted. "And you're the old friend, I imagine. Pleasure to finally have a more private conversation." Her eyes gleamed with something dangerous. "I'm someone who knows Reese very well. Intimately, for several years. I doubt you can say the same after just a few weeks." I immediately understood what she was trying to do, plant seeds of doubt and insecurity in my head, but something stubborn inside me refused to give in. "His past doesn't bother me at all, Celeste. Everyone has a history before finding the right person." She gave a low laugh that had no real humor. "How sweet that you think you're the right person for him. But it's not the past if I'm still available here when he gets tired of you and comes back to something more familiar." The arrogant confidence in her voice should shake me, but instead, it just made me laugh genuinely. "You're very confident about all this. Must be pretty lonely waiting around for someone who's already made it clear he's moved on." I saw anger flash in her eyes, the mask of superiority slipping for a second. "Watch what you say, sweetheart. You don't know the rules of this world yet. Don't know how things work here." I leaned slightly forward, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Then teach me all these rules, or stop wasting my time trying to scare me with empty threats." Before Celeste could respond anything, Reese's voice cut through the tension between us like a sharp blade, and I turned to see him standing a few steps away with an expression on his face that would make any sensible person back off immediately. "Are you done, Celeste?" She recomposed herself quickly, the fake smile returning to her face. "Just having a little chat with your date, Reese, getting to know her better." "Then stop talking to her now," he ordered, and there was nothing polite or gentle in his voice at that moment. "Sage isn't a game for you to play with, and I won't tolerate any attempt by you to make her feel uncomfortable." Celeste's eyes narrowed, the anger becoming more visible now. "And was I just a game to you all those years?" Reese took a step forward, positioning himself partially between me and her protectively. "You were a mutually convenient arrangement that served its purpose at the time. She's everything that truly matters to me now. See the difference?" The humiliation that passed over Celeste's face was so obvious I almost felt sorry for her for a second, but then she turned and walked away quickly through the hall without looking back, her high heels hitting the marble floor hard. I turned to Reese as soon as she disappeared from sight, placing my hand on his arm. "You didn't need to be that harsh with her." He held my face between his hands, forcing me to look straight into his eyes. "I did, because nobody messes with you at all, Sage. Nobody tries to make you feel less than you are, and especially nobody from my past." My heart squeezed in my chest at the protective intensity in his voice, and I allowed myself to relax against the warm touch of his hands on my face. "She was trying to convince me you'd get tired of me and go back to her eventually. Never going to happen," he declared with an absolute certainty that left no room for doubt. "You're mine now, in every way that matters, and nothing and nobody is going to change that." I rose on my tiptoes and kissed him right there in the middle of the hall full of people, not caring who was watching or what they'd think. When we separated, he was smiling in that small but genuine way I'd learned to love lately. "Let's go home," he murmured against my lips. "I've fulfilled my social obligation for today, and I'd rather spend the rest of the night just with you." I agreed readily, letting him guide me out of the hotel and back to the private world we'd built together, away from jealous ex-lovers and curious looks from people who would never truly understand what we had. Chapter 6. Real Danger.
You're safe now.
The first threat arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, hidden inside a white envelope with no return address that I found on my desk at work when I came back from lunch. My fingers trembled slightly when I opened it and found a photo of me leaving my building that same morning, taken from an angle that made it clear someone had followed me without me noticing. On the back, written in handwriting too neat to be comforting, was a single sentence that made my blood freeze in my veins. "Pretty girlfriend. Would be a shame if something happened to her." I called Reese immediately, my hands still shaking as I held the phone pressed tight against my ear. He answered on the first ring, his voice already loaded with concern before I even said a word. "What happened, Sage?" I told him about the photo and the message, my voice coming out more shaken than I'd like to admit. I heard the sound of something being hit hard on the other end of the line, probably his desk, and when Reese spoke again, his voice was so icy and dangerous that even I felt a shiver. "Stay in the office and lock the door now. I'm sending Kane to pick you up in 10 minutes, and don't leave there until he arrives." The order came quick and clear, with no room for discussion. "This is Julian Voss trying to pressure me using you, but it's not going to work at all." "Who's Julian Voss?" I asked, already locking the office door as he instructed. "An idiot rival who wants territory that doesn't belong to him, and who apparently decided that using you against me would be a good strategy." The anger in Reese's voice was palpable even through the line. He made a very serious mistake, and he's going to pay dearly for it. When Kane arrived to pick me up, there were 2 other men with him, all clearly armed and with serious expressions that left no doubt about how dangerous the situation had become. They took me straight to Reese's mansion on the outskirts of the city, a huge and fortified place I'd only visited once before. And when we got there, Reese was already waiting for me at the entrance, with an expression on his face that oscillated between contained fury and genuine concern. "Are you okay?" were his first words, his hands going to my face and examining me as if looking for invisible injuries. "I'm scared, but I'm physically fine," I replied honestly, allowing myself to relax into his touch for a moment before straightening my shoulders and looking straight into his eyes. "But I'm not going to be used as a tool against you, Reese. I won't let this Julian or anyone else turn me into your weakness." Something passed through his eyes, pride mixed with that fierce protection that had become so familiar. "You won't be used at all. I promise you that. I'm going to resolve this situation quickly, and meanwhile, you stay here where you're safe." The following days transformed into something out of a suspense movie I never wanted to star in. The mansion was surrounded by security at every entrance and exit, armed men constantly patrolling the grounds, and I found myself practically a prisoner inside those luxurious but suffocating walls. More photos arrived, each one showing different places I'd been, proving I'd been followed for days, or maybe weeks without noticing. Reese barely slept, spending most of his time in his office making tense calls and having secret meetings with Kane and other men from his inner circle. I could feel the tension growing around the mansion like a storm forming, knowing something violent was about to happen, but not knowing exactly what or when. It was on a Thursday night, almost a week after the first threat, that Reese left the mansion with half the security men, leaving me with strict instructions not to leave the main bedroom for any reason until he returned. I waited for hours that seemed to drag infinitely, pacing back and forth in the huge bedroom while my imagination created increasingly worse scenarios about what could be happening out there. When I finally heard the front door open and heavy footsteps in the hallway, I ran out of the room against all the instructions I'd received. I found Reese coming up the stairs, and my heart stopped when I saw the dark stains on his white shirt that could only be blood. "Are you hurt?" The question came out in a worried shout as I ran to him, my hands already searching for visible injuries. He caught my hands, holding them firmly between his. "It's not my blood, I'm fine." His voice was tired, and there was something cold in his eyes I'd never seen before, a darkness that showed exactly what he'd done that night. I should be afraid. Every rational part of me screamed that I should back away and question the blood-stained man in front of me, but I looked into those gray eyes I knew so well now, and could only feel overwhelming relief that he was okay and whole. "Are you really okay?" I insisted, touching his face with trembling hands. He seemed genuinely surprised by the question, as if expecting a different reaction. "I'm fine, Sage. But aren't you afraid of me now? You saw the blood. You know what that means." I moved closer, forcing him to look into my eyes. "Afraid of you? Never, Reese. Not for a second." "Why?" His voice came out rough and vulnerable in a way he rarely showed. "You saw what I truly am. Saw the violence I'm capable of when necessary." I held his face between my hands, making sure he couldn't look away. "I see a man who protects me without hesitation, who's never raised his voice to me, much less his hand, who's violent only with enemies who threaten what's his, but who's always been gentle and careful with me at every moment." He pulled me into his arms so hard it almost knocked the air out of me, his face hidden in my neck as he breathed deeply as if trying to anchor himself in my presence. "I don't deserve you at all. Let me decide what you deserve or not," I replied, hugging him back with the same force. "And I decide you deserve to be loved for who you truly are, not despite it." We stayed there embracing for long minutes, and when he finally pulled back to look at me again, there was something different in his eyes, a softness mixed with that fierce determination that defined so much of who he was. "Julian won't be a problem anymore," he said simply, and I understood what that meant without needing details I probably didn't want to know. "You're safe now, completely safe." And strangely, I believed him without any doubt, letting him guide me to the bathroom where I helped him take off the stained shirt and wash the blood that wasn't his from his hands, an act of intimacy and acceptance that sealed something definitive between us, in a way words never could. Chapter 7. Tyler's Last Attempt.
Leave this city.
2 weeks after the situation with Julian Voss, I was starting to believe I could finally breathe without looking over my shoulder all the time. The security around me had decreased slightly, although Reese still insisted that at least one man accompany me discreetly during the day, and I'd returned to my normal routine of work and social life. Tyler hadn't given any sign of life since that definitive conversation Reese had with him weeks ago, and I naively thought that chapter of my life was finally closed for good. I should have known that obsessed men rarely accept defeat so simply. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was leaving the office earlier than normal, planning to spend the entire weekend with Reese on a getaway he'd planned for the two of us. The security guard who normally accompanied me had called saying he was running a few minutes late because of traffic. so I decided to wait inside the building instead of standing on the street alone. That's when Tyler appeared out of nowhere, coming out from behind a column in the underground parking garage with an expression on his face that made every survival instinct in my body sound alarms. He looked different, more disheveled and desperate, his eyes with that frantic gleam that comes from someone who's completely lost control of their own sanity. "Sage, I finally got you alone," he said, his voice coming out quick and anxious as he took steps in my direction. "We need to talk away from that monster who's controlling your life." I immediately backed up, my hand already going to the phone in my purse pocket. "Tyler, get away from me now." "Reese warned you what would happen if you came near me again." Something wild passed through his eyes, and he advanced faster than I expected, his hand grabbing my arm hard enough to hurt. "You're mine, Sage. I saw you first. I knew you first. You should be with me and not with that criminal." I tried to break free, but his grip only tightened more, and panic started rising in my throat when I realized he really intended to take me from there by force. That's when I heard the sound of quick footsteps, and the firm voice of the security guard who was supposed to be waiting for me. "Release her immediately, or I'm going to make you release her." Tyler hesitated for just a second before pushing me hard against the wall and trying to run, but the security guard was faster, taking him down to the ground and pinning his arms behind his back with an efficiency that showed years of training. Another security guard I hadn't seen appear was already on the phone, clearly talking to Reese, and I could hear the fury in the muffled voice coming from the other end of the line. "Take him to the warehouse in the East Zone," the security guard ordered after hanging up. "The boss will deal with this personally." When I arrived at Reese's mansion half an hour later, escorted by the security guards who refused to let me go anywhere else, I found Kane waiting for me at the entrance with a grave expression that promised nothing good. "Where's Reese?" I asked immediately, still trembling slightly from the scare Tyler had given me. "At the warehouse dealing with the situation," Kane replied, his voice careful. "He asked me to make sure you stayed here and safe while he resolves this once and for all." I spent the next 2 hours pacing back and forth in the huge living room, unable to sit or relax while imagining what exactly Reese was doing with Tyler at that moment. Part of me knew I should be worried, that I should try to prevent any excessive violence, but the bigger and more honest part of me just wanted this nightmare with my obsessive ex to end definitively. When Reese finally came back, he looked tired but satisfied in a dark way, and came straight to where I was standing near the window. He pulled me into his arms without saying anything for a long moment, just holding me as if he needed to confirm I was really there and whole. "Did he hurt you?" The question came out hoarse against my hair. "Just grabbed my arm hard. Nothing serious," I replied, squeezing him back. "Your security guard arrived before he could do anything else worse." I felt his body tense with that information, his jaw locking in a way that showed he was fighting to control his anger. "He won't bother you anymore at all, Sage. That I can guarantee with absolute certainty." I pulled back slightly to look at his face, seeing the cold determination in his gray eyes. "What did you do to him?" At the abandoned warehouse in the East Zone of the city, Tyler was tied to a chair in the center of the empty and cold space, his face already showing signs that he'd tried to resist when he was brought there. Reese entered with calm and controlled steps, each movement calculated to intimidate, and stopped a few yards away just observing the pathetic man who had dared to put his hands on his woman. "You were warned very clearly about what would happen if you came near her again," Reese said, his voice dangerously low and icy. "I warned you personally, made the consequences very clear, and yet you chose to ignore them." Tyler tried to maintain some bravado, although his eyes showed the fear he was feeling. "She's mine. I saw her first. I knew her first. We had a real relationship before you showed up and stole her from me." Reese gave a laugh with no humor, the sound echoing through the empty warehouse sinisterly. "She's not anyone's property to be stolen or possessed, Tyler, but if she were, she chose to be with me, chose to accept me knowing exactly who and what I am." "You're a monster!" Tyler shouted, his voice coming out desperate and high-pitched. "A violent criminal who destroys lives and hurts people, and she still chooses you instead of me, who was always good to her." Reese moved closer, leaning down to be at Tyler's eye level, his voice becoming even more dangerous. "And even being everything you said, she loves me anyway. What does that say about you, and how you treated her that she prefers a monster like me over going back to a supposedly good guy like you?" The silence that followed was heavy and full of truths Tyler clearly didn't want to face. Reese straightened up, nodding to Kane, who was observing everything from a corner of the warehouse. "You have two very simple options," Reese continued, his voice returning to that cold and calculated business tone. "First option, you disappear from this city by tomorrow morning, go far away from here and never come back, or try any contact with Sage at all. Second option, you stay and discover exactly how creative I can be when someone hurts what's mine. Tyler was visibly trembling now, all the bravado and obsession giving way to real fear of what Reese was capable of doing. I'll leave. I swear I'll leave and never come back. Excellent choice, Reese said, nodding for Kane to untie the ropes. My men will escort you to the state border and make sure you actually leave. If I find out you tried any contact with her, if I hear your name again in any context related to Sage, there won't be a place in this country where you can hide from me. Understood clearly? Tyler nodded frantically, almost falling from the chair when the ropes were loosened. I understand. I understand perfectly. I'll leave and never come back, I promise. Reese watched as Tyler was practically dragged out of the warehouse by the security guards, and when he was alone with Kane, he finally allowed some of the tension to leave his shoulders. Will he keep his word? Kane asked. He will if he has any survival instinct left, Reese replied, already turning to leave. And if he doesn't, we'll make sure he regrets that choice for the rest of his short life. Chapter 8. Declarations.
I love you.
Reese returned to the mansion 3 hours after leaving to deal with Tyler, and when he came through the front door, I was still awake waiting for him in the living room, unable to sleep or relax, until I knew everything had truly ended. He looked tired in a way that went beyond the physical, as if the weight of everything that had happened in recent weeks was finally taking its toll. Is it over? I asked as soon as he entered, getting up from the couch where I'd spent the last few hours trying not to imagine increasingly worse scenarios. For real this time? He came to where I was and pulled me into his arms, the embrace tight and prolonged from someone who needed to confirm I was there and safe. It's definitively over. Tyler won't ever come back. That I can promise with absolute certainty. I felt relief flood me like a warm wave, all the weeks of tension and fear finally dissolving as I allowed myself to relax against his chest. Thank you for protecting me, for doing all this to guarantee my safety. I'll always protect you, Sage, he murmured against my hair, his hands stroking my back comfortingly. No matter from who or what, you're under my protection now, and that will never change. I pulled back slightly to look at his face, seeing the absolute sincerity in the gray eyes I'd learned to read so well. Why, Reese? Why me, specifically? You could have any woman you wanted, women who understand your world better, who don't bring complications like obsessed exes or threats from rivals. He held my face between his large hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks so gently my heart squeezed painfully in my chest. Because you literally fell into my lap that night and changed absolutely everything in my life. Because you see me as a man first, not as the monster everyone's afraid of or the opportunity many want to use. Because from the moment you sat there with that broken heel and that nervous sarcasm, I knew I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. My heart started beating faster, sensing he was about to say something important, something that would change everything between us irreversibly. Reese, because I love you, Sage, he said, and the words came out loaded with an emotion so intense, it completely knocked the air from my lungs. I love you completely and totally, in a way I've never loved anyone before in my entire life. I love you with an intensity that sometimes scares me, because I never allowed myself to feel something like this for anyone. Tears started falling from my eyes before I could control them, the emotion overflowing overwhelmingly. You really love me? You're not just saying this because of everything that happened? I've loved you since that first night when you laughed nervously after falling in my lap and made a joke about not sitting on strangers normally, he replied, wiping my tears with his thumbs gently. I've loved you since the first time you challenged my evasive answers and demanded honesty. I've loved you since you looked at me covered in blood and didn't run, when you chose to stay even after seeing exactly what I'm capable of doing. More tears fell, but this time they were from pure and overwhelming happiness. I love you too, Reese. I've loved you since you knelt in front of me at that restaurant and put new shoes on my feet like some kind of idiotic and unlikely fairy tale prince. He gave a low and genuine laugh, the sound vibrating through his chest deliciously. Prince, that's a new and interesting description for me. I smiled through the tears, touching his face with fingers trembling with emotion. Dark and dangerous prince. There's an important difference. The kind who rules dark territories but treats his princess like she's made of something precious and fragile. So you're my princess in this whole story? He asked, his eyes shining with humor and love mixed beautifully. I'm yours in every way that matters, I replied with absolute honesty. There was no point in denying or fighting what I felt for him anymore. Specific title is just an unimportant detail in the end. He pulled me into a kiss that was different from all the ones we'd shared before, loaded with promises of the future and declarations that went far beyond simple words. It was a kiss that sealed something definitive between us, that marked the moment where we stopped being just two people getting to know each other and became something much more significant and permanent. When we finally separated, both breathless and with hearts beating in sync, he rested his forehead against mine and took a deep breath as if trying to memorize that specific moment forever. "I never thought I'd be capable of loving someone like this," he confessed, his voice coming out low and vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed other people to see. "I spent so much time building walls around my heart, convincing myself that deep emotions were weaknesses I couldn't afford to have in this dangerous world where I live." I ran my fingers through his hair comfortingly, wanting him to know he could be vulnerable with me without fear of judgment. "And now? What do you think about it now after knowing what we feel for each other?" "Now I know you're not my weakness at all," he replied, lifting his head to look straight into my eyes with an intensity that made my stomach flip pleasantly. "You're my greatest strength, my reason to be more careful and strategic in everything I do, because now I have something too valuable to risk losing carelessly." More tears threatened to fall at those beautiful and unexpected words, and I allowed myself to hug him with all the strength I had, wanting to convey without words how much those declarations meant to me. We stayed there intertwined for long minutes, just existing together in that perfect moment where the outside world and all its dangers and complications seemed very distant. "What do we do now?" I eventually asked, my voice muffled against his chest. "After everything that happened, after all these declarations, what comes next for us?" He pulled me back just enough to look at my face, one hand coming up to brush away some strands of hair that had fallen over my eyes. "Now we live, Sage. We live without fear of Tyler or Julian, or any other threat that might appear. We build something real and lasting together, without hiding what we feel or being afraid of the future." "You talk like you're planning to keep me around for a long time," I teased lightly, although my heart was already racing at the implicit possibility in those words. "I'm planning to keep you with me forever if you'll let me," he declared without any hesitation or doubt in his voice. "I love you too much to think of any future where you're not by my side in every important moment." I held his face between my hands, making sure he saw the absolute sincerity in my eyes when I answered. "Then keep me, Reese. Keep me by your side through everything that comes, the good and the bad, the easy moments and the difficult ones. I choose you and this future together. I choose all of this, knowing exactly who you are and accepting every part of it." The smile that appeared on his face was so genuine and beautiful, it made my heart skip a beat. And when he kissed me again, it was with a reverence and promise that spoke of permanent commitments and vows not yet spoken, but already felt deeply by both of us. We spent the rest of that night talking about dreams and future plans, about what our life together would be like from then on, and for the first time since everything had started on that chaotic night at Eclipse, I felt a true peace settling in my chest. Tyler had finally left my life forever. The immediate dangers had been eliminated, and I had in my arms a man who loved me with an intensity most people would never experience. When we eventually went to sleep, intertwined in his huge bed with the certainty of better days ahead, I sighed contentedly against his warm chest and let sleep take me, knowing I'd found my place in the world in an unexpected but absolutely perfect way. In the lap of danger, where I'd fallen by accident, I discovered the love of my life and a future that promised to be everything I never knew I needed until I met that complex and dangerous man who saw me as something too precious to lose. Chapter 9, Forever in the Right Lap.
Best accident ever.
6 months had passed since that night of intense declarations, and my life had transformed into something I never would have imagined possible on that fateful Thursday when my heel broke and changed everything. I'd officially moved into Reese's mansion 3 months ago, after long conversations about what that would mean for us and our relationship, and it had been surprisingly easy to blend my life with his. My days were divided between the architecture office where I continued working on projects I loved, and the nights beside Reese, learning more and more about his empire and how everything worked behind the scenes. He never forced me to participate in the shadier business, but he also never hid anything from me when I asked, and I'd developed a silent understanding about the duality of the life we led together. It was on a Tuesday night that Reese came home with a gleam in his eyes that immediately made me curious and slightly nervous at the same time. He found me in the living room reviewing some architectural drawings spread across the coffee table, and the smile that appeared on his face when he saw me was so genuine my heart melted like it always did. "Wear something elegant tomorrow night," he said without preamble, coming to where I was and pulling me into a prolonged kiss. "I'm taking you to dinner at a special place." I smiled against his lips, already imagining where it would be. "Going to give me any hints about this mysterious place?" "You'll find out when we get there," he replied, with that mysterious tone he used when planning some surprise. "Just trust me." The following night,
When the car stopped in front of Eclipse, I felt my heart race with memories of that first chaotic night that had changed everything. I looked at Reese with surprise and emotion mixed together, immediately understanding why he'd chosen that specific place. "You remember this place?" he asked with a small smile as he got out of the car and came to open my door. "As if I could forget," I replied, accepting his hand and getting out of the car with much more grace than I'd had that first night. "This is where my heel betrayed me so spectacularly. Best betrayal in all of history," he murmured, intertwining his fingers with mine as we entered the restaurant where everything had started months ago. Eclipse was even more beautiful than I remembered. Or maybe it was just because this time I was entering on the owner's arm instead of stumbling in precarious heels. Reese guided me through the main room, and I noticed there were fewer people than normal, almost as if the restaurant had been partially reserved for something special. When we arrived at exactly the table where everything had happened that first night, that private and isolated table where I'd literally fallen into his lap, Reese stopped and turned to face me with an expression so intense it made my breathing fail. "Do you remember exactly what happened here?" he asked, his voice loaded with emotion he rarely let show in public. "I remember every embarrassing and wonderful second," I replied honestly, feeling tears already starting to form in the corners of my eyes without even knowing why yet. That's when he knelt in front of me, exactly like he'd done that first night to put new shoes on my feet. But this time, there was something different in his posture, something that made my heart practically stop beating completely. "You fell into my lap accidentally that night," he began, taking a small velvet box from the inner pocket of his jacket. "But now, I'm asking you purposefully and consciously to stay in my life forever. Marry me, Sage?" Tears started falling freely down my face as I looked at the beautiful ring gleaming inside the box, at the man kneeling in front of me with vulnerability and love stamped on his face, at all the people in the restaurant who had stopped eating to witness that moment. "This is an elaborate and dramatic proposal," I managed to say through the tears and laughter mixing in my throat. He smiled in that way that was only mine, the genuine smile few people in the world had the privilege of seeing. "But did it work?" "Yes," I practically shouted, extending my trembling hand to him. "Obviously yes," as if I could say anything other than yes. He slid the ring onto my finger, with hands that also trembled slightly with emotion, and when he stood up, he pulled me into a deep kiss that was accompanied by enthusiastic applause from all the people present at Eclipse. It was the same audience that had witnessed my disastrous fall months ago, now celebrating this perfect and planned moment. A year had passed since that proposal at Eclipse, and I'd been married to Reese for 6 months in a small but beautiful ceremony that had brought together only the closest people in our lives. Married life was even better than I'd imagined, a perfect mix of comfortable routine and unexpected adventures that kept everything always interesting. It was on a quiet Saturday morning that I took the test I'd discreetly bought the day before, my hands trembling slightly as I waited for the necessary minutes to pass. When I looked at the positive result, I felt a wave of emotion so intense I had to sit on the edge of the bathtub to process it. I found Reese in the kitchen preparing breakfast, and when he looked at me with that morning smile I loved so much, I took a deep breath before speaking. "Reese, do you remember when I fell into your lap that night?" He stopped what he was doing, all his attention immediately focused on me. "I remember every detail. Why? Now there's someone small growing in my lap," I said, watching his expression change from confusion to understanding in a matter of seconds. "You're pregnant?" The question came out in a whisper full of wonder and joy mixed together. I nodded, tears already returning to my eyes. "We're going to have a baby." He crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and picked me up, spinning while laughing with pure happiness, and I had to remind him between laughs that spinning a pregnant woman might not be the best idea. He put me back on the ground with extreme care, his hands immediately going to my still flat stomach, as if he could feel the life growing there. "I'm going to be a father," he said with wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents together, and you're going to be the most overprotective and insufferable father in the world," I teased affectionately. "You can bet I will," he agreed without a trace of shame, pulling me into another careful hug. On the 1-year anniversary of our engagement, Reese took me back to Eclipse for a private celebration just for us. I was 5 months pregnant, my belly already rounded and visible under the elegant dress I wore, and when we entered the restaurant hand in hand, memories of how it all started flooded me with renewed force. We sat at the same table as always, and Reese pulled me to sit on his lap, purposefully this time, his arms wrapping around me protectively with my belly between us. "Did you bring backup shoes this time?" I joked, remembering that first chaotic night. "Comfortable and appropriate shoes for pregnant women," he replied, with that dry humor I loved so much. "I learn from my past mistakes." "You learn?"
That's impressive and unexpected, I teased, relaxing against his chest. He kissed my neck softly, his voice coming out low and loaded with emotion. I learn everything I need to learn when it comes to you and our family. I turned in his lap to look straight into the gray eyes I knew so well now, touching his face with love. I still can't believe it all started because I disastrously fell on you. Best accident of my entire life, he replied, his hands stroking my belly where our child was growing. It should have been a complete disaster, but it was the beginning of everything that truly matters. I agreed in silence, thinking about the whole journey we'd traveled since that first night. Running from obsessive Tyler, I'd fallen into the lap of a dangerous stranger without knowing that moment would define the rest of my entire life. It should have been scary. It should have been wrong in every possible way. But it had been exactly what I needed without knowing it, because sometimes you need to fall in the wrong place to find the right person. And I'd fallen exactly where I needed to be from the beginning, in Reese Harlow's lap, in the lap of danger that had transformed into absolute safety, in the lap of the love I didn't even know I was looking for until I found it so unexpectedly.